Blood doesn't wash out of white uniforms as easily as you'd think. Lieutenant Junior Grade Eleanor Campbell, United States Navy Nurse Corps. I served aboard the USS Comfort, a hospital ship, from January to September 1945. We operated in the Pacific Theater during the final campaigns of the war, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the preparations for the invasion of Japan that never came. 7 months that aged me 7 years. People have this romantic idea about Navy nurses. They picture us in crisp uniforms, holding soldiers' hands, bringing comfort and healing, like we were angels in white, floating through the war without getting dirty. That's horse shit. Pardon my language, but it is. We were covered in blood, vomit and worse every single day. We sawed off limbs, held boys down while they screamed during surgery, and watched them die despite everything we did. Angels don't do that kind of work. We did. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. My mother was a school teacher. My father worked for the railroad. I had one sister, Margaret, 2 years younger. I always wanted to be a nurse, something about helping people, making a difference. Got my RN from Good Samaritan Hospital in 1940, worked in the emergency ward for a year. Then Pearl Harbor happened. The Navy needed nurses desperately. They were sending out recruitment posters. Join the Navy Nurse Corps. Serve your country. Made it sound like an adventure. My supervisor at Good Samaritan, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me aside. Eleanor, you're one of the best nurses I've got. Calm under pressure, good hands, strong stomach. They need people like you. I enlisted in February 1942. My mother cried for a week. My father was proud but terrified. Margaret thought I was crazy. You'll be in a war zone, she said. You could die. Somebody has to help those boys, I told her. Training was at the Naval Hospital in San Diego. They taught us military protocols, shipboard procedures, how to work in combat conditions, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the reality of a hospital ship receiving casualties from an island invasion. I spent 2 years stateside working at naval hospitals in San Diego and San Francisco. Good work, important work, but I kept requesting sea duty. Wanted to be where the need was greatest. Finally, in December 1944, I got my orders, USS Comfort report for duty, January 5, 1945. The Comfort was a Haven-class hospital ship, 520 feet long, painted white with huge red crosses on the hull and superstructure, protected under the Geneva Convention. The Japanese were supposed to leave us alone. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. The ship had 12 operating rooms, 500 beds, X-ray facilities, laboratories, a blood bank. It was a floating hospital, fully equipped. The medical staff was 50 doctors, 150 nurses, and 400 corpsmen. We could handle hundreds of casualties at once, triage them, stabilize them, operate, and either send them back to duty or ship them stateside for long-term care. I reported aboard in January 1945. The war was entering its final bloodiest phase. The Philippines campaign was winding down. Next up was Iwo Jima, then Okinawa. Island by island, getting closer to Japan. And the Japanese were fighting harder, more desperately, with every mile we advanced. My first night aboard, I met my roommate, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from Alabama. She'd been on the Comfort since 1944, had already been through Lady Gulf and Mindoro. She took one look at me, fresh uniform, nervous smile, and shook her head. "You been in combat zones before?" "No, ma'am." "Well, you're about to learn real quick. First piece of advice, sleep when you can. Once the casualties start coming, you won't sleep for days." "How bad does it get?" She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Worse than you can imagine. And then it gets worse than that." I didn't believe her, thought she was exaggerating. She wasn't. February 19, 1945. The Marines landed on Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island, 8 square miles, that the military needed for air bases. Intelligence said it would take a few days to secure. It took 36 days and cost nearly 7,000 American lives. We were stationed offshore, waiting for the wounded. The first casualties came in by landing craft and helicopters on D-Day +1. I was assigned to the receiving ward, the first stop for incoming wounded. Triage, assessment, immediate stabilization. I'd worked emergency wards, seen car accidents, industrial injuries, bad falls. Thought I was prepared. I wasn't. The first Marine they brought in was maybe 19 years old. Shrapnel had torn through his abdomen. His intestines were visible, dirt and sand mixed in with the blood. He was conscious, screaming. 4 corpsmen carried him in on a stretcher, and his blood was dripping through the canvas, leaving a trail on the deck. Gunshot wound, multiple shrapnel, penetrating abdominal trauma, the corpsman shouted. He needs surgery now. I grabbed my trauma kit, started cutting away his uniform. The wound was worse than it looked from a distance. Much worse. I'd never seen injuries like this, never even imagined them. Get me plasma, I called to another nurse, and morphine. Jesus Christ, get him morphine. We got an IV started, gave him a quarter grain of morphine, tried to stabilize him enough for surgery, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. I was packing gauze into the wound, but it kept soaking through. My hands were covered in blood. My uniform was covered in blood. What's your name, Marine? I asked him, trying to keep him conscious, keep him focused. Reynolds, he gasped. Private Michael Reynolds. Okay, Michael. You're going to be okay. We're going to take care of you. I was lying. I knew it. He probably knew it too. They rushed him to surgery. I never saw him again. Found out later he died on the operating table, bled out before they could repair all the damage. That was the first one. By the end of the day, we'd received 73 casualties. By the end of the week, over 400. By the end of the Iwo Jima campaign, we'd treated more than 1,500 wounded Marines. The injuries were horrific. Burns from flamethrowers, limbs torn off by artillery, sucking chest wounds, traumatic amputations, head injuries that left men brain-damaged, blind, paralyzed, and the psychological cases. Marines who'd cracked under the stress, who were catatonic or violent or completely dissociated from reality. We worked 18-hour shifts, sometimes 24. You'd work until you literally couldn't stand anymore, then sleep for 4 hours and do it again. The casualties never stopped coming, never. I learned to triage, learned to look at a man and instantly assess, can we save him? Is it worth trying? Or should we just make him comfortable and let him go? That sounds cold, sounds cruel. But when you have 50 incoming wounded and only 12 operating rooms, you make choices. You save the ones you can save, the ones too far gone. You give them morphine, hold their hands, and let them die as peacefully as possible. I learned to give morphine overdoses, never talked about it officially, never wrote it in reports. But when a Marine was dying in agony, when there was nothing we could do, when he was begging us to make it stop, you gave him extra morphine, enough to quiet the pain, enough to let him slip away. Was it murder? Was it mercy? I don't know. All I know is I couldn't watch them suffer. The operating rooms ran constantly, day and night. Surgeons would operate for 12, 15 hours straight. We'd assist, holding retractors, sponging blood, passing instruments. The surgeons were incredible, doing battlefield surgery in a moving ship with limited supplies under impossible conditions. But even they couldn't save everyone. I remember a kid, couldn't have been more than 18, who'd lost both legs to a landmine. We got him stabilized, stopped the bleeding, got him to surgery. The doctors amputated what was left, cleaned up the wounds, closed him up. He survived the surgery. We thought he'd make it. 2 days later, he got an infection, gas gangrene. We tried everything, debridement, antibiotics, more surgery, but it spread too fast. I watched this boy turn gray, watched the life drain out of him as the infection consumed him. He died screaming, begging us to save him. His name was David Brennan, from Ohio. He'd written a letter to his mother the night before the landing. It was in his personal effects. Dear Mom, don't worry about me. I'll be home before you know it. Love, David. I had to send that letter back with a different message. Had to write to his mother explaining that her son had died of infection, that we'd tried everything, that he'd been brave. What do you say? How do you make that better? The burns were the worst. Marines hit by flamethrowers, caught in fuel fires, trapped in burning vehicles. They'd come in with third-degree burns over 60, 70, 80% of their bodies. Skin charred black, flesh exposed. The smell, burned human flesh has a smell you never forget. Sweet and horrible and wrong. We'd cut away the burned tissue, cover the wounds, give them morphine and fluids. But burn victims almost always got infections. And in 1945, we didn't have the antibiotics we needed. Most of them died, slowly, painfully, over days or weeks. I learned to recognize the smell of death, learned to look at a patient and know he's not going to make it. You develop an instinct, some combination of vital signs, appearance, response to treatment. You just know. And once you knew, you had to decide, do we keep fighting, keep trying, or do we make them comfortable and let them go? There was a Marine, Sergeant Paul Mitchell from Texas, who'd been hit by multiple artillery fragments, lost his left arm, had shrapnel in his chest and abdomen. We operated, got him stable, but he developed sepsis. His blood pressure kept dropping despite fluids. His kidneys were failing. On the third day, he grabbed my hand. I'm dying, aren't I, ma'am? I wanted to lie, wanted to give him hope, but he deserved the truth. Yes, I think you are. He nodded, like he'd already known. Will you stay with me? Of course. I sat with him for 6 hours, held his hand, talked to him about his family, his ranch in Texas, his life before the war. When he finally died just after midnight, I closed his eyes and added his name to the list I was keeping. Like the chaplain at Bastogne, I needed to remember them, needed someone to know they'd existed. The worst part wasn't the dying, it was the ones who survived but wished they hadn't, the quadriplegics, the men who'd lost their faces, their eyes, their genitals, the ones with traumatic brain injuries who'd never be the same. There was a young Marine, Robert Kowalski from Chicago, who took shrapnel to the face, lost both eyes, his nose, most of his jaw. We reconstructed what we could, but he'd be blind and disfigured for life. 20 years old, engaged to be married. When he was stable enough to understand his condition, he tried to kill himself, tried to tear out his IV, tried to stop breathing. We had to restrain him, sedate him, but you could hear him crying at night, begging God to let him die. What do you say to someone like that? Thank you for your service. You're a hero. Those words are empty, meaningless. He didn't want to be a hero. He wanted his face back, his eyes, his future. March turned into April. Iwo Jima ended. Then came Okinawa, even bigger, even bloodier. The casualties from Okinawa were worse because the campaign lasted longer. 82 days of fighting, over 7,000 Americans killed, 32,000 wounded, and the kamikazes. Oh God, the kamikazes. The Japanese had started using suicide attacks, pilots deliberately crashing their aircraft into American ships. They hit destroyers, carriers, support vessels, and they tried to hit hospital ships despite the Geneva Convention, despite the Red Crosses, despite everything. On April 28, 1945, a kamikaze hit the USS Comfort. I was in Ward C when it happened. The general quarters alarm had sounded, enemy aircraft inbound, but we were a hospital ship. We were supposed to be protected, safe. Then the explosion. The entire ship shuddered. Metal groaned. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in. That dim red glow that makes everything look like hell. I was thrown against a bulkhead. Patients were screaming. Equipment was crashing. Smoke was pouring in through the vents. What happened? Someone shouted. We've been hit. A kamikaze had crashed into the ship's superstructure, killed 28 people instantly, nurses, doctors, corpsmen, patients, wounded dozens more, started fires that threatened the surgery wards. We evacuated patients from the damaged sections, carried them on stretchers, dragged them when we had to. The ship was listing slightly, taking on water. I didn't know if we were sinking. Nobody knew. I found Sarah Mitchell in the corridor. Her uniform was torn, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. "Sarah, are you okay?" "I'm fine. Ward E is gone. It's just gone." Ward E had been full of patients, post-surgical cases, men recovering from amputations, infections, wounds, all gone in an instant. We set up emergency triage in the mess hall, started treating the new casualties, our own people injured in an attack on a hospital ship. The irony was sickening. A corpsman I'd worked with, hospital apprentice first class James Wong from San Francisco, had been in the section that got hit. They brought him in on a stretcher, unconscious, severe head trauma. We tried everything. He died 2 hours later. A nurse, Lieutenant Patricia O'Connor from Boston, lost her right leg. We operated, amputated above the knee, saved her life, but she'd never work as a nurse again. Her career was over. She was 26 years old. The Comfort survived. Damage control teams got the fires out, patched the holes, kept us afloat. But we'd lost 28 people, 28 more names for the list, 28 more families getting telegrams, and the casualties kept coming because the war didn't stop just because we'd been hit. The fighting on Okinawa continued. The wounded still needed treatment. We kept working. May 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. But in the Pacific, we were still fighting, still dying. The Japanese weren't surrendering. They were fighting harder than ever. I'd been aboard the Comfort for 5 months. Hadn't been off the ship except for brief shore leave once in Pearl Harbor. 5 months of blood and death and screaming and wounds that never stopped coming. I was exhausted, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually exhausted. I'd watched hundreds of boys die, had held their hands, heard their last words, written letters to their families. I'd amputated limbs, closed sucking chest wounds, pulled shrapnel from bodies. I'd given overdoses of morphine to men who were suffering too much, and I was starting to break. It started with the shaking. My hands would tremble when I tried to start an IV, when I held instruments during surgery. I couldn't make it stop. Then the crying. I'd be in my quarters trying to sleep, and I'd just start crying. Couldn't stop, would cry for an hour, then pull myself together and go back to work. The nightmares were constant. I'd dream about the patients I couldn't save, about David Brennan dying of infection, about Robert Kowalski trying to kill himself, about Michael Reynolds bleeding out on the operating table. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, and for a moment I'd forget where I was. Sarah noticed, pulled me aside one day in June. "Ellie, you need to talk to someone. You're not okay." "I'm fine." "You're not. I can see it. We all can. I just need sleep, need a break." "When's the last time you smiled? When's the last time you felt anything besides exhausted?" I couldn't remember. Couldn't remember the last time I'd felt human. The breaking point came in mid-June. They brought in a Marine with a traumatic amputation. His right arm had been blown off at the shoulder by a mortar round. Standard procedure. Stop the bleeding, stabilize, prepare for surgery. But when I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw my sister's fiancé. He looked just like Richard. Same hair color, same face shape, same build. Wasn't him, obviously. Margaret's Richard was stateside, working in a factory. But the resemblance was uncanny, and I froze. Just stood there, staring at this Marine who looked like Richard, watching him bleed, unable to move. "Lieutenant Campbell," the head nurse, Commander Morrison. "What are you doing?" "Get that IV started." I couldn't. My hands wouldn't work. My brain wouldn't work. I just stood there. Another nurse pushed me aside, started the IV, did her job, and I backed away, watching, useless. Commander Morrison pulled me into her office after. "Lieutenant, what happened out there?" "I don't know. I couldn't." "You froze. In the middle of treating a critical patient, you froze." "I know. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." She looked at me, really looked at me, saw what Sarah had seen, what I'd been trying to hide. "How long have you been having symptoms?" "What symptoms?" "The shaking, the nightmares, the dissociation." "How long?" I wanted to lie, but what was the point? "A few weeks, maybe a month." "You should have reported it. We're short-staffed. You need every nurse." "I need nurses who can do their jobs, and right now you can't." She sighed. "I'm putting you on medical leave. 2 weeks. Rest. See the ship's psychiatrist. Then we'll reassess." "Commander, please, I can work. I just need..." "Lieutenant, that's an order." I spent 2 weeks in my quarters, mostly sleeping. The ship's psychiatrist, a Navy doctor named Captain Harrison, talked to me about what we now call combat fatigue, battle stress, psychological trauma. Back then, we didn't have good names for it, didn't have good treatments. "You've been exposed to more trauma in 5 months than most people see in a lifetime," he told me. "Your mind and body are telling you they need a break. You need to listen. But the wounded still need care, and you can't care for them if you break completely. There's no shame in this, Lieutenant. You're not weak. You're human." I returned to duty in July, light duty only. No surgery, no critical care, just routine patient care, changing dressings, administering medication. It felt like failure, like I was letting everyone down. But I couldn't handle more. Not yet, maybe not ever. August 6th and 9th. The atomic bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then August 15th, Japan surrendered. The war was over. We'd won. It was finished. I felt nothing. No joy, no relief, just numbness. We'd won, but all those boys were still dead. All that suffering, all that pain, it had happened. Winning didn't change that. The Comfort sailed back to the States in September. I was discharged in October 1945. Went home to Portland. My family threw a welcome home party. Everyone wanted to hear stories about the war, about being a Navy nurse, about the adventure. I couldn't tell them, couldn't explain what it had really been like. They wanted heroic tales. I had nightmares. I tried to go back to nursing. Got a job at Good Samaritan, the same hospital where I'd trained, but I couldn't do it. The smell of hospitals, antiseptic, blood, sickness, it triggered me. I'd be changing a patient's dressing, and suddenly I'd be back on the Comfort, treating Marines with their limbs blown off. I lasted 3 months. Then I quit, told them I needed time to readjust. I never went back. I married in 1948. Good man, John Campbell, accountant. He was patient with me, understanding, never pushed me to talk about the war. We had 2 children, a son and a daughter, normal suburban life, garden club, PTA meetings, Sunday dinners with the family. But I was never really there. Part of me was still on that ship, still in those wards, still watching boys die. The nightmares continued for years. I'd wake up screaming, and John would hold me until I stopped shaking. My children learned not to come into my room at night without calling first. I couldn't watch war movies, couldn't read books about the Pacific Campaign, couldn't attend veterans gatherings. It was all too close, too real. In 1955, I had a breakdown, complete mental collapse, spent 6 weeks in a psychiatric facility. They diagnosed me with what they called war neurosis, gave me medication, therapy. It helped some. I'm 62 years old now. The war ended 35 years ago. My children are grown. John retired last year. We travel, visit the grandchildren, live a quiet life. But I still carry it, still see their faces. Michael Reynolds, David Brennan, Paul Mitchell, Robert Kowalski, James Wong, Patricia O'Connor, all the others, hundreds of them. I kept a list, like the chaplain kept his list, names of the ones who died in my care, the ones I couldn't save. It's in a box in my closet. Sometimes I take it out, read through the names, try to remember their faces. People thank me for my service now. Call me a hero. Tell me I should be proud of what I did. I'm not proud. I'm not ashamed either. I did my job, saved some, lost others. That's all. But the cost, nobody talks about the cost. Not the cost to the boys who died, but the cost to those of us who tried to save them. We gave pieces of ourselves we can never get back. Pieces of our humanity, our peace, our ability to feel normal emotions. Sarah Mitchell, my roommate on the Comfort, she killed herself in 1952. Pills. Left a note saying she couldn't live with the memories anymore. Couldn't keep seeing the faces. I understood. I've thought about it too. Not seriously, not as a plan. But I've understood the impulse, the exhaustion of carrying all those ghosts. What keeps me going is knowing that some of them survived. Some of the Marines we treated on the Comfort, they made it home, had families, lived full lives. The ones we saved, they mattered. Our work mattered. But that doesn't make it easier, doesn't make the nightmares stop, doesn't bring back the ones we lost. If I could go back, if I could talk to that young nurse reporting for duty in January 1945, what would I tell her? Would I warn her? Tell her to request different orders, stay stateside, avoid the trauma? Number. Because those boys needed someone, needed nurses who'd work 18-hour shifts, who'd hold their hands while they died, who'd fight like hell to save them even when it seemed impossible. Somebody had to do it. Somebody had to be there. But I'd tell her this. It will cost you more than you can imagine. It will take pieces of your soul. You'll never be the same person again. The girl you are now, the one who wants to help, who believes in making a difference, that girl will die aboard that ship. What comes back will be someone different, someone haunted, and you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life. The USS Comfort treated over 6,000 casualties during World War II, saved thousands of lives. The nurses, doctors, corpsmen, they were the unsung heroes of the Pacific War. But we weren't heroes. We were just people doing an impossible job under impossible conditions, and it broke most of us. I look at my hands sometimes. The same hands that started IVs, held retractors during surgery, closed the eyes of dead Marines. They're old now, spotted with age, shaking slightly from arthritis. But I still see the blood, still feel the texture of burned flesh, the warmth of fresh wounds. Blood doesn't wash out of white uniforms as easily as you'd think, and it doesn't wash out of memories at all. 35 years later, I'm still scrubbing, still trying to clean the blood off my hands, still trying to make sense of what we did, what we saw, what we survived. The war ended in 1945, but for those of us who served aboard hospital ships, the war never really ends. We're still there in those wards watching boys die, still helpless despite all our training, all our dedication, all our prayers, still carrying the ghosts of every patient we couldn't save. And that's the truth nobody tells you about military nursing, about being an angel in white, about serving your country. You save lives, but you lose yourself in the process. And nobody prepares you for that. Nobody warns you that surviving the war is just the beginning, that the real battle, the one against your own memories, your own guilt, your own broken pieces, that battle lasts a lifetime. I'm still fighting it, still trying to make peace with what I saw, what I did, what I couldn't do. Some days are better than others, but I'm still there on that ship, still will be until the day I die. The USS Comfort, white hull, red crosses, Haven-class hospital ship, my heaven, my hell, my ghost ship, sailing forever through my nightmares, full of boys who never made it home,